YouTube, this is All Things Quick. Today we're going to be diving into separating this motor and this transmission from one another. We're going to have to get this transmission off of this engine so that we can sell the transmission for parts, and we can use the motor so we can start tearing it down so we can get it down to the block and send it away to the machine shop. Alright, so I'm just going to leave that right about there. I'm going to throw a tire underneath that, and we're going to start taking the transmission off because we don't really need it too high, and we don't really need to move it actually. I'm going to put her up just a little bit here. So one thing that I did earlier in a previous video was I took some of these bolts off of these axles here where I didn't really need to, not now anyways, not until I start tearing this motor apart. At one point I was trying to rest these on a bar to hold the motor up without the bolts in them, and that's not very good, so I quickly rectified that. And so for right now I'm just going to toss these bolts back in here, just a couple of them anyways, just so that it has some stability and making sure that these things doesn't break. I'm going to toss these guys back in here. So basically I'm just doing this so that I can actually set this thing down on something without it twisting or bending or anything like that. So we're just going to drop this thing a bit. This is why I wanted to put those bolts in there, so then I can rest it on those axles right there. If I didn't have that bolt in, it's just going to twist and turn and potentially break it. So anyways, now it's just time to get that transmission off. So I already have this strapped on to the motor, so I'm just going to take this one off. This is on the transmission. If I don't take this one off, then I won't be able to get the transmission off. So there's a series of bolts here on these transmissions. They're inverted Torx, so they're an E14, E12, and E10. These ones look like this. They're inverted Torx bits. So you'll have the bigger ones, you'll have the medium-sized ones, and then you'll have the small ones. So we're just gonna work ourselves in a circle here in no particular order, just whatever bolt comes up first, then we're gonna take that one off. So we'll start at the top. Oh, so for this guy, I definitely need a breaker bar. This guy doesn't want to come off too good. Oh, there we go. That's one. That's two. That's three. That's four. That's five. That's six. So at this point the starter motor is free right at the back side here. That's jammed on there real good. So hopefully you can get some kind of pry bar or something in here and just have at her until she comes loose. So just for reference of what I'm doing, right in here there's a pilot pin, and it becomes corroded over a lot of time. As you can see, there's corrosion in and around here. That builds up inside there, and then it makes it tough to get out. But if you just wiggle it back and forth with a pry bar, then you can get that out. And once it's out, if you're planning on installing that same one again, then just take a wire wheel or a wire brush to the end of that, just so that that corrosion buildup can get taken off and it's easier to put it back in. So there we go. You can see right in there that that pilot pin was what was stuck in here. So that, if you plan to put this back on, it's best that you grind that down a little bit and just clean up the corrosion on that so it's easier to put back in the next time. Or you can drill out that hole slightly if that's what you prefer to do. So there's two right down in the bottom side here. I'm gonna get the lower one first. See, this is the kind of stuff you tend to do by hand, because imagine trying to get an air ratchet down in here. Unless you're using a swivel bit, which is kind of impractical for certain applications, that would be the only way that you could get an air ratchet in here. So this is why I do everything by hand when it comes to removing engine mounts and transmission bolts. Now for this big guy here. And that's number 8. And there's one more bolt right on the bottom side, and it is right there. I'm not going to film that because this angle would be silly to film, but I'm just going to take that off, and then that's all the bolts for the transmission. And that is number 9. In this case, we would have to disconnect the drive shaft right here or right here, depending on which way you wanted to go. But fortunately for me, I already disconnected this drive shaft from here. So there's 3 bolts. They're also inverted Torx. I have already done that. So now we just have a torque converter to deal with, and then then the transmission will be free. So this guy here is a 10 mil, and it's actually the last bolt technically for the transmission. That needs to come off. That just holds the shield in place here. So that needs to be free for the transmission to come off, because this is actually bolted to the motor. Then you open up this little tab here, and then you have access inside there to the torque converter. So as you can see inside in here, you'll have to spin this torque converter in order to get access to, I believe, 3 bolts. You'll have to spin your crankshaft, so you can do that at the front of your motor. But if you're trying to do this, you have to remember that before you put your motor back together, you need to put it to top dead center so that you can make sure that the timing is set properly. So for me, there's 2 things to mention here. One is that we don't have to worry about top dead center because I'm stripping this motor down bolt by bolt, so we don't have to worry about that right now. Secondly, I'm going to take this fan off because it's going to have to come off anyways, and then it just gives me easier access to my actual crankshaft down there. So this is a number 5 hex. Just going to hammer these in just a little bit. Alright, there we go. That's our fan off. That thing is good to go. I'm actually just going to thread these back in place here, just so that we don't have to mix them in with other bolts and lose them. There we go. Now we got clear access to our crankshaft, and we can put this thing in the orientation that we need. So this is a 22, and I'm just going to use a breaker bar as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it clockwise in the orientation that I need, and I'm just watching in that spot right in here for when it's turning. And once it turns to the right spot, I'll be able to see the bolt line up properly with that spot for the torque converter. I'll spin it here, and I'm watching in for where the torque converter is for the bolt to show up. And I'm turning it clockwise because it's the orientation that the transmission will spin normally. So as I'm spinning it, you'll see here that the bolt is about to line up. And there we go. So that's 1 bolt that I have access to now. So this is a 17 mil bolt in here. Thing about this is you're going to want to have a breaker bar as well, or something that's longer than just your ratchet to get that out. But also you're going to want to put something on just the way that this is, or maybe even if you put this down and put a bar to the ground. But basically you don't want the crankshaft to spin at all while you're taking that torque converter off. You need to block this somehow. So with this, I'm just going to try it like that. If that works, that's great. So now that that is blocked on the crankshaft there, I'm going to try to turn this, because as you turn this, it's going to want to turn. There you go. So that's out. As the torque converter turns, the crankshaft is going to want to turn as well. So there it is. That's 1 bolt out, and there's 2 more. So again, we're spinning our crankshaft, and we're watching for this bolt to come back up. And there it goes. That's the second one. So I'm going to get this guy out now. Make sure that my crankshaft is stuck, however that is. And there we go. And that's the second one out. And then one last time, moving the crankshaft so that we can expose the last and final bolt. And there we go. That's the last one. And there we go. That's the last one out, so that's number 3. If you were doing this to put a transmission on right away, this would be a really good time to just put this back to top dead center. If you don't know how to put it back to top dead center, you would take your first spark plug out, and you would put a bar inside that fits into the piston, something smaller than this. Put a bar inside there, or a screwdriver or something, and you would turn your crankshaft, and as soon as this thing pops up to the top, just before it starts going back down, that would be your top dead center, just so you guys know. There will be more videos about that in the future once we actually tear this motor apart and once we start rebuilding it again. You can see where the transmission is already splitting apart, which is a good thing. So that means that it's not too bad. It's not seized on there, hopefully. So we're going to try to get that off right now and see how that goes. So I'm sure you just saw that thing shift. I'm just going to bring this down a little bit, make it a little easier on me. So you can see how this motor and transmission has now slipped apart from each other. So you can see here the drive shaft has slipped off now, so that's free. The transmission cooler lines, that's the only thing that's holding it back now, so it's a 13 mil right here. So that's probably going to leak out, but that's okay. I'm going to clean it up after if it does. Got a little leakage there, but that's okay. There we go. That's the motor and the transmission now apart from each other. Normally you probably wouldn't want to let it fall like that, but you know what? We're rebuilding this whole thing, so who cares? So I'm just going to put this whole thing up now. So as you can see, this is now all apart here. Torque converter is off. Well, it's loose anyways. And then I'll have to take off that flywheel from the motor and clean up this mess with some kitty litter, but that transmission is off and it's good. I think I'm just gonna sell it with that transfer case on it, but we'll see about that. Otherwise, everything looks pretty good. The starter motor is free and the cooler lines are off. That is a automatic transmission off of a M54B30. I'm gonna have to maneuver this around in the yard because I want to get this thing out of the way so I can get this motor on a tire or something that holds it up. So the last thing with this is to take the torque converter off, and since we got these bolts off already, there it goes. And that's that torque converter off. This flywheel, I'm actually going to leave this on for right now. There's not really a need for it to come off. If somebody wants to buy it with the flywheel, then I'll take it off. If not, I'll just start taking this apart next time. I've kind of run out of time for this video. So that being said, this is the end of the video. If you like this video, definitely give this a thumbs up. If you enjoyed it in any kind of way, it definitely helps me out if you leave a like. If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, definitely hit that subscribe button because we're doing so much more stuff with this motor, more than the eye can see right now. And we're going to be building this motor to a capability of 750 wheel horsepower. Definitely subscribe, and then you can check out this whole series. We're doing a start to finish, bolt by bolt, to build this 750 wheel horsepower car. So if you like this video, definitely hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one. See you later.